I have seen your science and I have thrown it out the window. Today we're going to be making infinite free energy inside of oxygen not included. And no, this is not a scam. It's science. Video game science. Don't worry about it. Doesn't have to be completely real. Now in the last video, you'll have remembered that we used a oil refinery in order to process crude oil into petroleum. The problem is that that reduces the amount of petroleum we get out of the system by 50%. Therefore, today I'm going to be replacing that one single piece of equipment with more equipment over here. And this essentially is going to be what we're going to be creating and integrating into that other system. And what this is a thermal aqua tuner, which is going to heat up the crude oil and convert it into petroleum at a 1-to-1 ratio, changing everything. All right, how to make it all fit. So before we go and set everything up here, let's go ahead and do the calculation so that we can get some sort of idea of what we're going to expect here. There's a couple different ways that people look at this. One, you heat everything up until it gets to sour gas, then cool the sour gas back into natural gas. That's one way. But in our situation, we're just going to heat up the crude oil till it turns to petroleum at 400 degrees Celsius. So, so to do this calculation, if I look back at what I did last time, you can see that it was quite accurate as far as what I was getting out of it at 1,106 kilojoules right there. And it was consuming a little bit more water than we were using, so I had to bring it in via another method. I used an algae distiller as an example. There's many ways to get polluted water. So to modify this calculation, really all I got to do here is double what I'm getting out of the oil refinery. So once I do that, you can see the amount of polluted water that I'm generating right here is more than what I'm putting into the system. So that's 1,265 grams a second as compared to 1,000, which is what I'm using. This also increases the amount of carbon dioxide that I have. So we'll take a look at slicksters a little bit later on and what we could potentially get back out of that. That changed the amount of power we could potentially get out of this by quite a bit. We're up to 2,100 kilojoules, which makes sense considering we doubled it. Another key thing here is that we need to have more than one petroleum generator. So we should have one that's running continuous, and that will probably be powering the rest of the equipment. And then the next one will come in and kind of provide extra power, or we can siphon off some of the other elements to kind of use on their own, depending on how we want to work everything. Lomax 606 says running continuously, the oil well produces about 20 kilograms of natural gas per cycle. So that's 33.3 grams a second. So if we use that and we include it into the calculation, then we should be getting a more accurate representation of how much that natural gas generator is going to run. So that means I have an imbalance in my calculation. You can see we have extra natural gas down here, so I have to account for that. So once I've done that, you can see that the natural gas generator here is going to run 60% of the time rather than, I think it was like 0.3. So that, once again, changes our predicted power output at 2,284 kilojoules. And you can see we're also getting a little bit more polluted water out of that too. So everything adds up. Now this is absolutely going to be one very complex build, and it is going to require some high-end materials because we're dealing with temperatures that are over 400 degrees at this point. So if we make a liquid pump of steel, its overheat temperature is 275 degrees Celsius. That's not enough. If we make it out of niobium, so we're up into the space stuff, then we have 575 degrees Celsius. Boom. That's what we'll be using to construct this thing. Running inside the thermal aqua tuner, since we already are up there in the space kind of realm of things, yeah, we're definitely going to be using supercoolant. It's just super amazing. So the reason we want to use supercoolant, well, there's two reasons. The temperature ranges that we're working with here are pretty drastic. And the other thing is that the specific heat capacity is 8.4 as compared to water. That's down there at 4.1. So as we're running this with all of its power consumption, we're actually getting a lot more energy out of the unit. Now we got to figure out how to build it into a system. This is going to take a while. There's a new bundle that I think you guys will be interested in, Coder's Bookshelf by No Starch Press. Now this covers things like Rust programming language or objective-oriented JavaScript, Python Playground, and more. You can check it out right down here. Think Like a Programmer, an introduction to creative problem solving, Rust, all these other different reading resources right there to get you up and running in the programming language of your choice. So, not only will this go to help support the creators of the content, but since I am partnered with Humble Bundle, this will help support the channel and a charity such as the Freedom to Read Foundation. Use the link in the description below, pay what you want. Thank you so much for your support. Alright, so I have everything set up. Hopefully it's all working correctly. Let's turn it on and see what happens here. There's a lot of different things going on. That's the pipes. This is the power grid. We've got loads of automation. So much. Oh my. I'll explain it all later, but essentially what we got going down over here is it should be hot enough to hopefully turn all of the crude oil that comes into here, which gets detected, into petroleum. Excellent. So at this point, yes, I am now piping out petroleum. This over here is basically a giant heat sink that maintains a decent temperature. And I'm running so many different pipes through it just to balance out all the temperatures and get as much heat back into this side as possible. Because as you'd imagine, this side over here gets very hot. So therefore, this side over here wants to get really, really cold. And if you reach absolute zero, this side will no longer get hot. It just kind of stops running. You end up using a lot of power and not going anywhere. So reintroducing heat into this side is important in order to make it an efficient system. That way I don't have to use the teppidizer in order to bump the temperature back up, which is just simply consuming power to generate heat. Now I have several batteries up here and they're all going to run at different levels. They're all balanced the same, but I'm going to set up their automation different so that I can step up the amount of power generation as need be. So I'm going to set the upper limit to turn everything off at 95. However, this is going to become active if it's, let's say, 75. This one here will be active if it's 50. If we ever drop it below 25, then that petroleum generator will run. So it gives me some sort of idea of what's going on there. So instead of using the radiant pipes up here to cool this, I'm actually just using granite pipes. My thought is that if this stuff runs a little bit hotter, then it should result in a slightly more efficient system down here because, again, we're not running the teppidizer quite as much. We'll just have to see. Okay, I ran into a small issue here with this. You can draw too much from the batteries if you put too much crude oil in here because it takes so long for it to heat up sort of thing, and this thing draws so much power. So if you can keep that crude oil to a minimum, and I'm trying to keep it to 10 kilograms, then it won't draw too much power, and you can keep getting more power and power out of the system because it's not, it isn't relying on the amount of batteries you have up here as much. So you can see this thing turning on and off every once in a while, and it's trying to keep the temperature above freezing. Not that that would be a bad thing. You can actually turn this to ice and it wouldn't be a problem. But again, you can't let it reach absolute zero, and otherwise it would. You can see the coolant that's running through there is at right around 90 degrees, and that's just a little bit too cold. So this thing should continue to run until it reaches 450 degrees Celsius. And so long as I have enough water up here, maybe I set that to be above 6, then we'll get a little bit more water. Okay, actually, you know what I said about this being ice? You can't have it be ice, because otherwise, then when you go to put liquid through there, like that, it would freeze. Now this here, you see how it'll go through here and it'll get really cold, but then it's going to come out at a higher temperature, because that is a set output temperature. So we've actually done the opposite. We've delivered the heat that's from up here into there, and then we added more heat to it. Which is actually then going to take heat from here and bring it back into there. And then once again, we're going to take that heat and we're going to deliver it back here. So you'll see that this is 40 degrees, and then by the time it gets through that, it's now down to 26. And there goes some crude oil. That's outputting at around 80 degrees Celsius. Maybe a little bit hotter. That then flows up into this area. And because this is set to 450 degrees, it's going to turn to petroleum. And then at that point, the petroleum moves on. If it's crude oil, it gets filtered back around. All right, so I'm going to simulate a load on this system. This is 400 watts of power. So that's going to work to draw the batteries down. And then we'll see this thing kick back on and produce more power. Okay, so I've increased the power draw to 800 watts here. And then set up the logic for whether or not I'm going to let power flow out of this thing. Okay, so here it is running. We only have one generator running, and it's just keeping everything running. Now there is one thing I forgot to do, and that is to allow the carbon dioxide in this area a way out. So I'm just going to add that to the grid, and there we go. If that is above 2000, then it's just going to pump that out. Now at this point, I'm not doing anything with the carbon dioxide. I know I can. I'm just not doing it right now. Just trying to keep things, you know, this is plenty complicated. I'm trying to keep things as simple as I can, considering how complex it is already. All right, so now things seem to be up to a much more steady state here. A couple of these generators will turn on every once in a while. That refills the battery so that we're definitely producing more power than we're using in total. I have a lot of natural gas that's making its way up here. It's really cool to watch the power work. It's like this one turns on, still draining, this one turns on. Oh, yep, we got enough. And this one doesn't need to turn on. That's cool. And then once it gets up towards the top, boom, everything turns off. It's awesome to see that this thing is self-powering with an 800 watt load sticking off the side of it. And I mean, the generators aren't even all running. It's just kind of like, we're gonna run once in a while. It's also nice to see that the temperature inside of here is quite warm. Being that it's a little bit hotter, then it's more efficient because we can exchange more heat between here and here. So here's one thing I wanted to try. This is probably just gonna blow everything up. Let me just give it a second. If I put a temperature shift plate in here. So at this point we've used a bunch of niobium. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and continue to do that. And I'm gonna stick it right there. Let's see what happens. I mean, that's working really good. Now this pump here is not as efficient as it could potentially be because it runs whenever this is not dripping more in. So it's actually recirculating quite a bit. But as long as it's flashing to petroleum fast enough, then it's not inefficient. That's kind of the trick there. So that in part is why this is only set to be at 10 kilograms, which I might even want to set lower, which, I mean, I might be able to squeak a little bit more power out of it, but I mean, come on, look at this. Look at all this. And we're still storing up more and more petroleum up here. Okay, so check this out. So this petroleum here is at 400 degrees C, or just about. And by the time it gets out of this, it's down to 113 degrees. So it's really transferred quite a lot of heat. Meanwhile, right above it is supercoolant that's at negative 91 degrees Celsius. The polluted water, I think, comes in at right around 70, and it leaves at 50. If I had to say, the water is probably entering right around... Oh, let's take a look. This could be a radiant pipe. It doesn't need to be granite. This is coming in at 41. Let me just go ahead and do this real quick. So it's in at 40, then all of a sudden it's up to 47. Let's see how hot this liquid gets by the time it's on its way out. 54 degrees. Now, of course, since I'm cooling this, that's going to cool that, so there's so many things going on here. But now it's dropping down to 30-something. Okay, so what if I put a temperature shift plate inside of here, or a couple of those. Still pretty much the same. If I could upgrade this pipe to thermium, then I think it'd be even better. But we gotta draw the line somewhere, so I'm drawing it at niobium. Boom! More power! Alright, so that should be exactly 1,000 watts, 1 kilowatt that this thing is just supporting all the time. What is the heat that thing's kicking out? Surprisingly, not too much. One thing that's quite interesting here is that I'm producing more carbon dioxide than I can even pump out. So, yeah, we're gonna have to feed some slicksters. I don't think that'll happen in this video, though. Another thing I'm going to do here, because I'm curious of just how much power there is inside of this, is I'm going to create a bypass for the liquid reservoir up here. The reason I'm doing that is because we're continuously building up more and more petroleum, and we will reach a point where that is completely full, and at that point it'll start to back up here. And at that point, what I'd want to do is detect an overflow of that petroleum so that I could do something with it, be it run off to some sort of thing like a spaceship or to another generator. What I'm going to do with it right now is I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of this liquid reservoir so I don't have to wait forever, and then detect that I've reached a certain amount of backup in this pipe, and then force one of the generators to turn on. That way it will be running as much as it can. So to do that, what I'm going to do is use 2 liquid bridges, just like this. One is going to go in like that between the 2 whites, and then one between the 2 greens, and then the green is going to flow out. And the green is going to flow out over here, not into that, because I don't want that to be included at all. So the final arrangement looks just like this. Now, because of that, the petroleum will go up here, it'll jump over to this spot, and then it'll continue to back up. It won't ever reach this point unless this is completely backed up. So therefore, I'm going to use a liquid element sensor right here, and that is going to tell me whether or not petroleum is present in that certain tile. And if it is, then I'm going to set an OR condition for this generator right down here. So we take OR, whoops, we take OR like that. So if the generator requires it to run to keep the power up, then okay, that's good. Or if we are overflowing, then we're going to turn it on as well. And what we're not going to do is turn that thing on and off, because we don't want to do that. Okay, there we go. All right, so let me just run you through the process here once more. So we have the water that flows in to the oil reservoir. That'll then be released once it reaches a certain pressure. In this case, I have it set to 25, so it does it more often than not. Crude oil flows out, flows over here, gets converted into petroleum. Petroleum flows up into this loop up here. All right, so here we go. This will reach its maximum, or it should. And there we go. Now the other generator turns on, and then it turned off. And there it turns back on. And it's still on. I might have to hook both of them up at the same, because yes, that's right. This entire system, if it's running correctly, should be able to keep one of these up and running indefinitely. So therefore, I do need to not do this. I need to actually enable both of those in order to even suck down enough petroleum in order to keep everything up and running. Well, in order to keep the system from flooding. That also means I should just get rid of that so that the natural gas just runs. Okay, so this is maximum power output here without any sort of automation to really stop them from running, unless of course they're drawing down too much. Okay, so I've been running the system here for a couple cycles now, and it's becoming apparent that there is a limitation. And if you take a look at this liquid reservoir, you'll notice that there's a lot of extra crude oil building up inside of here. So what's happening is that the thermal aqua tuner cannot heat up the crude oil fast enough. There's only so much energy that can be pumped out of the aqua tuner right here, and therefore it never really gets up to that 450 degrees Celsius cutoff temperature. It keeps falling below 400 C, so therefore as more and more crude oil is dropped in, we have to wait. So we're at a limit there based on the material that's being run through the aqua tuner and everything. And it's not like the niobium isn't doing a good job. It never really gets above 450 as well. So it's really interesting to see that these reports almost don't make any sense. So I can generate anywhere from 1,600 to 1,500 kilojoules right there. And yet I'm still capable of running all of these lights continuously and then gaining extra. So now one thing I could tell you is that the liquid tepidizer down there is really only consuming about 26 kilojoules per cycle. And that means that all of this extra effort that I went to pipe all these other liquids through here has really paid off as far as making that much more efficient. So this thing just doesn't really run that much. You can run that off of a manual generator if you really wanted to. So I'm going to go ahead and try to set this to like 5 kilojoules. We'll let that be a little bit lower and see if that makes a difference. If you lower the amount there, it may not saturate it as quickly, and I might just be able to pump it much more often. But if things are thermally working correctly, then it shouldn't make a difference. You can see just how quickly I'm adding crude oil to this. It's definitely flowing in faster than it can flow out. But let's see what that one change, how that affects cycle 151. So it's worth noting that if we were to have an overflow detection on crude oil, what we could do is siphon off clean water at this point and do something different with that, you know, like grow a plant or something. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you can build this thing inside of your base, inside of a real game, I'm sure you can figure out something to do with some extra water. This thing is ridiculous. Let's see what cycle 151 was. It's the exact same number. So thermally, things here are working out. It's just, it doesn't matter. The only way to go up from here is to add another aqua tuner right next to this. So the loop, rather than just going like this, it'll go from one aqua tuner to another aqua tuner, and then over here. Okay, so I'm going to try to add one more thermal aqua tuner to this loop, and that'll be the last thing I'm going to test today. But it's not going to be the last experiment, because while we may have infinite power today, I don't have infinite amount of time, and we still have to deal with all of this carbon dioxide and what we can do if we feed that to slicksters, or what happens if we were to scrub that out and maybe use that to offset the tepidizer. Which one of those are going to be more efficient? My guess is the slicksters, but we'll just have to see. But we're going to have to answer that in another video. Let's go ahead, add one more aqua tuner to this, and just see what happens. All right, so here we are in cycle 160. I've got the 2 thermal aqua tuners up and running. They're doing pretty good. It is a little less stable now, now that this is a fair bit wider. I think some metal tiles down there would be a good idea to try to even some things out. When it was smaller, it wasn't much of a big deal, but now it kind of is. As far as the reports, we're going to see at the end of this cycle, but I think they're going to be right in line with the calculations that I was predicting earlier. Another thing that I'd mention with this is that as I'm expanding the amount of potential power used in this entire thing, I might want to expand the battery capacities as well. Because when these generators turn off, they do drain down very quick. Or fairly quick, not like super quick. I mean, you can see that right there. It's sucking it down pretty quick. All right, let's take a look at these reports. So for the previous cycle right there, I was able to generate 1,892 kilojoules. So not quite as much as I thought I was going to get. If I remember back to the calculations, I I was predicting 2,284. The thing is, if I go back a couple of cycles, you'll see that there was 2,333 on that cycle right there. If I go back one before that, that was 2,299. And then there's another one, 2,192. So there might have been something that I changed right here. I think I played with this number a little bit. One of the issues that I was having here was that the oil over here was getting so hot it could potentially flash into sour gas, which is what I don't want to happen. So I kind of made some adjustments here. So I guess we're gonna have to wait till the end of 161, but from what I've seen here, that's pretty darn close to what I was predicting right there. And even with that in mind, we're still not capturing any of this carbon dioxide, so there's going to be a ton. Well, I don't know if there's going to be a ton, but there's going to be more available there. It also kind of depends on whether or not this is on an up cycle or if it's on a down cycle as well. So yeah, you can see in this cycle right here, we're now actually introducing that natural gas, so we should see that the power usage or the power generation is going to go up quite a bit, because that thing's going to run, obviously. So let's see what we get by the end of this cycle. 1,900. Okay, well, interesting. So it is a little bit less than what I was predicting, but yet I've seen earlier reports where it was as much as I was predicting. I don't know. I could mess around with this for even more hours, but unfortunately I don't have that much time. But as we can see right here, definitely this system right here can take water, turn it into crude oil, and then reprocess that crude oil into petroleum, creating infinite energy and giving ourselves extra crude oil or extra water. As you can see, certain things are filling up. We have extra water and we have extra crude oil that I have to figure out something to do with. So yeah, there's a lot of potential for a system like this. If you can build it, it'll be pretty awesome. Thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this little episode here of Oxygen Not Included. If I've earned your subscription, then thank you so much for that. Have a wonderful day. Stay awesome, guys. Peace. Brothgar out.